What was the most shocking thing you heard the quiet kid say? Nothing. Let me explain. I took a class with Seung-Hui Cho, the Virginia Tech shooter, one semester before the shooting. The class was called Contemporary Horror. It was a one-time elective offered by my favorite professor. We read horror novels and watched horror films, and discussed the craft of creating scary stories, but also how they reflected or represented their era's fears. It was a great class. There were only about 15 students, and it was discussion heavy. Cho was one of them. I honestly never noticed him, even in that small class, until halfway into the semester. He wasn't quiet, he was silent. So, on the day we all finally noticed him, our professor asked him something directly. And Cho just stared at him. I can't remember the question, but the nature of it meant silence was potentially an acceptable and funny response. So, we all laughed. Except for Cho. He just kept staring at our professor. Our laughter awkwardly died, and after a few moments of uncomfortable silence, our professor just said, "Okay," and moved on. It was so strange. But I forgot about that weird moment until after his rampage. That professor later told me that Cho's papers had been disturbing, but the nature of our course meant the envelope was being pushed a bit, and it had never been bad enough to suggest he do what he did. That professor was a good man, and he admitted he struggled with not blaming himself on some level for 1. Not identifying how severe Cho's mental health problems were, and 2. For the graphic and terrible nature of some of what we watched in that class, which may have inspired Cho. He knew that was bullshit, but a part of him couldn't help but feel some blame. It was terribly sad. So, this one kid, who barely ever said 2 words, one day, asks the teacher for the time. It was some after-school thing, and there was no clock. The teacher says the classic, "Time for you to get a watch," which for some reason, was funny to everyone else. The quiet kid doesn't laugh. He looks the teacher dead in the eyes, and once everyone quieted down, he says, "So are you gonna tell me the time, or what?" We were in like, 7th grade. This was when I was in my first semester of college 2 years ago. There was this girl who never said a word. The teacher would ask her questions, but she would just not say a word. I can honestly never remember her even making a noise. One day, the teacher got upset. He felt like she was ignoring him, and that she was being disrespectful, so he said, "Did no one teach you how to speak?" She stood up, walked up to the whiteboard, grabbed his marker, and wrote, "I am mute, you fool." Apparently, no one ever told the teacher that she had a disability. But she was one badass for taking his marker out of his hand and writing that, "lol." In junior high, in the mid-80s, the game Trivial Pursuit was all the rage. We played it in math class one day, and this kid, Gary, who never said anything at all, totally spanked everyone else by answering every single sport-related trivia question. He got a lot of attention for it, and I believe he walked a little taller after that day. I don't think I ever heard him say anything else, but I did see him sitting on the bleachers at a few sports events. The quiet kid from my grade stood up one day, grabbed a broom, stood on a chair, and began trying to swat bees that got inside. One bee landed on the window, where a quiet kid proceeded to yell, "Die bee, die," and then swatted and shattered the window. He screeched when it happened and then sat back down. Never heard him speak again. There was this one quiet girl in my class. And she would never say anything. This was around 3rd or 4th grade, but I would always try and get her to talk. I would be nice, like when she had no paper in her binder, I'd take notice and give her some before she can ask. When she was searching for a pencil in her bag, I gave her an extra one I had. It was like small little acts. Picking up her pencil when she dropped it, etc. Then at lunch, this kid was picking on me. I was short, weak, and very emotional back then. She came out of nowhere and told the guy, "I'll give you 3 seconds to walk away." I was stunned, because those were the first words I'd ever heard her say. The guy slapped me, and she did a straight kick to his balls after that. I was honored. And shocked she ever said anything. She never said anything after that, but I did say thanks. In kindergarten, there was this kid, Donatel, and he never said a word. He was nice enough, played games and everything, but completely silent. One day, we were looking out the classroom window, when a cop drove by. Donatel opens his mouth and says, "Police car." At the time, we were all excited to hear him speak, but looking back, that kid must have had some really dark history. In middle school, the quiet kid, Steven, had an arch rival, Robbie. In class, Robbie always seemed to come out on top of their little scuffles, mostly because Steven couldn't really formulate or execute a burner comeback. He just rolled over and let Robbie get his insults in until the teacher stepped in. One day, I was walking behind Robbie after that class, and Steven quietly crept up behind him. Before Robbie could even turn around, he got as close as possible and said, "If I was to come into your house and kill you while you were sleeping, I doubt anyone would even notice." Then he disappeared into the darkness of the science hallway. I don't remember the exact words, but that was pretty damn close. I was about 55% shocked, 30% laughing hysterically on the inside, and 15% terrified. Robbie never made fun of all Stevie again. I was the quiet kid. I go to a private school, so there's a fair share of spoiled, privileged kids. In any case, while most people are pretty nice, there's a lot of complaining. Anyways, I was in English class, which is one of my favorites, except that I don't really have any friends in the class. I had trained myself to not say anything, because when I did, I was usually met with groans and a chorus of Matt's doing it again. The teacher was a nice, young, pretty English major, who had also gone to a private school, so she was used to well-behaved kids. To her delight, my class is that. The only negative quality about most of the students is, like I said, complaining about completely inane things. Somewhat early in the year, when she was still under the impression that we were all well-behaved, uniform young men and women, during a quiz a random girl decided to start whining about analogies. Understand, this is the kind of class where talking during quizzes is socially acceptable, because it's understood that no one's cheating, or dumb enough to cheat by straight up asking people the answer. I had gotten pretty sick of the complaining, so after she finished her rant about analogies, I pulled out an old line from Dave Barry, thus ruining my class's state of grace forever. And that's why I started doing heroin. At the time, I thought that would be pretty hilarious, but instead, the class just stared at me, and the shocked teacher couldn't seem to find the words to say. No one in the class really knew me well, so they had no reason to believe I was joking. For the rest of the year, no one complained about analogies. We sat in the classroom in, I think, 5th grade. My friend had done a PowerPoint presentation about Eminem. He talked about how he lived in a trailer as a young boy. And the quiet straight-A student stands up and says, "Just like you," and asks to use the toilet. No one understood anything of what just happened. We live in Northern Europe, and it's practically no one that lives in a trailer here. My friend didn't. I was the quiet kid in this scenario. I'm a skinny white kid, and I was working at Jimmy John's with a bunch of outgoing and loud black kids. While we were closing, I was doing the dishes, and everyone else was doing their jobs. When we would close, they would blare rap music through the restaurant speakers. They would always rap the words and be really loud during the songs. So, during one of the songs, when it got quiet, I just yelled at the top of my lungs, "Woo, this is my shit," and then I just went back to doing the dishes. Everyone looked at me as if I had lobsters crawling out of my ears. I was the quiet kid. There was this kid in high school who was trying to bully me at lunch, and for context, he was a 21-year-old junior. He kept getting left back every year, for reasons unknown. Him. "Why don't you get out of our country?" Me. "Why don't you get out of high school?" He couldn't think of any response, turned red, and the kids around the table started dying of laughter. I won that day. I went to middle school and high school with a boy named Daniel. Never once heard him say a word. A friend of mine said he would whisper sometimes. The night of our senior party, we heard some music coming over from the corner, where the karaoke machine was set up. At first, no one really noticed him, because people had been singing on it all night, and most people stopped paying attention. But this was different, because no one was singing, and the music was playing. The DJ stopped the music and started the song again. Daniel was standing there looking frightened, but this time around, when the song started, he begins to sing. Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing and just crowded around him. He wasn't a great singer by any means, but 99% of the people in the room hadn't ever heard him talk. When the song was over, everyone started clapping and cheering, and he walked away with a big smile on his face. So, there's this one kid I know, who is very quiet. He rarely talks, but when he does, people listen. He always looks very calm, but I heard a story about him once. He was on the baseball team in high school, and in one game, just about everything had gone wrong for him. He had been hard by several pitches, had a hard time in the field, and basically just had a crappy game. In his last at-bat, he strikes out. He walks into the dugout, pulls off his helmet and chucks it as hard as he can. He picks up his bat and just starts going ham on everything in the dugout, splintering benches, smashing water coolers, denting metal support poles, everything. Meanwhile, everyone else is just in shock, basically trying to stay out of the way, because he isn't paying attention to what he's hitting. Finally, he calms down, but I sure don't want to ever make him mad. So, this isn't so much what he said. The seniors played locker pinball with the underclassmen. It's exactly what it sounds like. They bounce one little guy constantly. Made him late for class a lot, because they'd keep him bouncing for so long. Well, one day, they were bouncing him, and he super politely said, "Please stop, you're hurting me." Obviously, the seniors bounced him harder. Apparently, that was this kid's breaking point, because he leaped onto the nearest senior, who just happened to be our star basketball forward. The little freshman bit into the senior's neck and literally tore a mouthful of skin off. He just stood there with this piece of bloody skin on his shirt growling at everyone. Needless to say, no one ever messed with Mad Dog Mike after that. I was the quiet kid in school. My dad decides that after spending 15 years of my life in the same area and school with the same friends, he was going to relocate our family an hour away. I started a new school 2 years before I would graduate, which sucked. It was a very small school, so everyone already knew each other, and I didn't really fit in. I got picked on a lot by the kids at my new school, and already having a pretty bad anxiety disorder, I withdrew pretty far into my shell. I tried to stay as invisible as possible, but I still got picked on and bullied. One day, about 6 months into the school year, I was standing at my teacher's desk getting held on a math assignment, and I looked up to the entire class staring at me, whispering and laughing. And something in me just snapped. I slammed my book down onto the table, closed my eyes, and just screamed at the whole class to leave me alone, and then stormed out of the class. It was a really tough 2 more years, but I graduated, moved out of that town, and am now doing better than all of them, so fuck them.